All right, welcome to the first episode of College Football Chatter with Chase and Caleb. I'm Caleb, and I'm alongside here with Chase, of course. Chase, we got a good show today. We're going to start off by recapping the 2011 BCS title, talk about changes to the BCS system, and then we'll look ahead to 2012. First off, Chase, let me just get your thoughts on the BCS title game. I know we're LSU fans, so it was a little ugly to watch, but just what were your thoughts on the game in general?
It was a bit surprising that you knew that there weren't going to be a lot of points scored on either team's behalf. The defenses were going to show up, but in Alabama's case, of course, their offense showed up big, and LSU's just was mistake prone early in the first half, and really they never could recover, and the defense didn't play really real spirited considering that. So
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I mean, we like you said, we knew the defense. This was going to be a defensive struggle game. Obviously, the November game finished 9-6. That one in favor of LSU. But I think what surprised a lot of people who watched the first game maybe weren't expecting. Let's talk about a little bit about AJ McCarron. We talk about the mistakes of LSU, and yes, there were many mistakes, but AJ McCarron really showed up and played well for Alabama. Looks like he's going to have a good future there. 23 for 34 with 234 yards. He played really well, and I think his touches that he was putting on the passes, maybe ones he was missing in the first game, maybe was the difference for Alabama.
I agree. AJ really showed up. He's only a sophomore, but he definitely outshined Jordan in that game. And usually Jordan in the past bowl games has showed up big in those games, but AJ only a sophomore, like I said, and he definitely came to play and definitely showed it. Alabama definitely has something to look forward to.
Yeah, they do, and of course, as we look ahead to Alabama next season, they do lose 7 starters from each side of the ball. That, of course, expecting that Trent Richardson will go to the NFL, which many think he will. But yeah, AJ McCarron looks like he was a lot different in this game because in the first game he looked rattled. A lot of people want to talk about that wheel route that he threw to Trent Richardson in the first game in the first overtime that he missed. A lot of people think that if he'd have put that ball on the money, it would have scored a touchdown and potentially Alabama would have won the game. But let's talk a little bit about Jordan Jefferson. I know a lot of people want to put blame on him, and I'm not going to sit here and defend him and say he had this best game of his career, but how much of this do you put on Jordan Jefferson versus maybe the play calling?
A lot has to do with, I think, in my opinion, a lot has to do with the play calling. You when Jordan first came out in 2008, I believe, against Georgia Tech, the coaches really did put him in situations where he could succeed.
Absolutely.
And in this game, they were like playing scared. They didn't really want to put him in too many pressure situations early, and really, when you can't put him in that type of situation, he's not going to succeed. So
yeah, well, I think that was definitely the difference between that '08 game because I recall that '08 game. That, in my opinion, to this day, still one of Jordan Jefferson's best games he had in his career. Looking at this one, I agree. I don't think the coaches really gave him the ball and said, "Hey, go out and win it for us," And I think that's kind of what you have to do in a situation when a game comes across like this. Whereas Alabama, on the other hand, they came out first 2 plays of the game, went play action, play action. LSU stacking the line defensively to stop the run. And A.J. McCarron says, okay, well, I'll beat you with the pass. And the play action for Alabama worked all night.
Huge, yeah.
All night. You got Smelly, the tight end for Alabama, had a great game. I think dropped 1 pass, but for the most part, he was one of A.J.'s top targets. And when you talk about an Alabama team who's not very big at the receiving core, to have a tight end that can go downfield and make some catches for you, that can really make a difference.
And you wondered where, D'Angelo Peterson and a bunch of their LSU's playmakers were that all game. They never really threw it downfield. Never really took any shots downfield.
Not at all. And listening to Les Miles' press conference after the game, I know he mentioned that they made the calls to get the ball down the field. It just never happened. Now, I want to talk about one thing, and I know that this is very, very, big. A lot of people don't really want to talk about this. Some people think that Jarrett Lee should have got the opportunity to come in. What's your thoughts on that?
In talking to a few people, I just, there was maybe questions about was he eligible. Well, if he was eligible, he wouldn't. If he wasn't eligible, he wouldn't have been on the sidelines.
Absolutely.
But early on, I heard some things about him not participating in certain punishment work and stuff, which could have, affected the decision in putting him in and not putting him in. So, the coaches have their reasons. I'm not going to sit here and say Les Miles should have done this, should have done that, because again, we're not on the sidelines, so
Absolutely.
and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So.
And I think what a lot of LSU fans need to take into consideration, yes, this may have been one of the most poor coached games on LSU's part in a long time. But let's remember, Les Miles, he's been under a lot of fire since he's been at LSU. I mean, all the way back from 2005 when he blew the 21-point lead at halftime to Tennessee. Then the Ole Miss debacle with the time management and
Tennessee last year.
I mean, different things. Les Miles has been under a lot of fire, but what he seems to do is block that out, and he led LSU to a 12-0 regular season. Won the SEC championship. Technically, it's the best year of college football in LSU school history. But I think a lot of people couldn't close it out. And if you can't close it out, this team was talked about as possibly being one of the best of all time. And now, who's going to remember them?
Yeah.
And so that actually probably will bring us into our next topic with the BCS changes. There's a lot of people out there that feel Alabama didn't deserve a chance in this game. LSU went down there in the regular season, beat them in their own stadium. Alabama didn't win their division, didn't win their conference. But at the end of the 2011 season, they're sitting as national champions.
They showed they wanted it. And then most people were saying if this was close enough game, that you could have, it would have been a split, and you'd have needed a third game to decide it all. And
definitely.
So, you want to start to get into the fact of a playoff system or a de facto +1,
Yeah. But, I mean, at 21-0, there's not much arguing that they're not the best team in the country. And
when you don't get over 100 yards.
Yeah, when you're sitting at 92 yards offense, it's not pretty. I don't want to take anything away from Alabama. They played incredible this season.
Perfect, really.
One of the best defenses that we've seen in a long time. This kind of reminds you of that Oklahoma team back from the 80s when you talk about the defense. But this Alabama team, I think, deserves a national championship, but it's so much that if they deserve the national championship, why weren't they able to close it out on November 5th? A lot of people don't feel, and including Nick Saban, a quote that he's been supposedly quoted saying back in 2003 was, if you don't win your conference, you have no business being in the national title. I mean, do you agree with that? What do you think?
I agree, but at the same time, people... You look at the national championship game, you're like, November 5th was a certain result. But at the same time, you go and you look at the national championship, and Alabama proved superior to LSU in that game. And like you say in football and all of sports, anything can happen on any given day.
That's right.
Many people believe a playoff system would in fact is inevitable. For this coming future.
And all the conference commissioners and people with the BCS met in New Orleans Tuesday on the 10th to discuss possible changes. Reports are coming out saying somewhere between 50 to 60 different scenarios were discussed. I know one thing that a lot of people are really pushing for, maybe not a full-on 16-team playoff, maybe not the 12-team playoff like the NFL has, but they want to see this +1 thing. Let's talk a little bit about why you think the +1 would benefit the BCS and why maybe it wouldn't.
+1, I think, for this year, many people believe it would have been perfect. But at the same time, you start looking at college athletics in general and where students are in their academics and finals and the coming semester, all this stuff that goes into being a student athlete, you start to factor in, okay, what's a +1 going to do to this, and what's a playoff, possibly more than a +1 going to do.
All right, absolutely.
But I think for this year, for sure, it would have benefited. But again, you have to look at the long run and say, what is the best system to have, to determine a true national championship.
Yeah.
And many people believe a +1, and many people believe a playoff, and not many people are for this. Just let people vote and put so and so at number 1 and number 2.
Yeah, but I will say this though: the system we're in right now calls for the 2 best teams in the country. Mm-hmm. I know Oklahoma State fans out there, they're upset. Look, I get it. I also maybe thought that Oklahoma State maybe deserved a chance. They won their conference. They beat the pants off of Oklahoma in the Bedlam game. Maybe they did deserve their chance. But looking back at the two seasons, when you want to compare Alabama and Oklahoma State, both at the end of the season sat 11-1. I get it. I understand Oklahoma State had more quality wins. But at the end of the day, when you lose to a 6-6 team, and I understand the whole the plane crash that morning, with the basketball coaches and things. But that being said, they had a 17-point lead going into halftime of that game. They blew that. Mm-hmm. Alabama lost at home, and that's what a lot of people were, giving them some, taking some credit away from Alabama because of that. They lost in overtime by 3, didn't give up an offensive touchdown. So it is what it is. But for a system that calls for the two best teams in the country, I think they got it right. I think looking at the teams throughout the season, I think by far LSU and Alabama separate themselves from the rest. But, like you said, you never know what's going to happen any given Saturday. And what that +1 system does is allows them to prove it on the field, which I think ultimately is what fans want. They want to see it proven on the field. Mm-hmm. Opinions, they're always going to be different across the country. And so let them play it out on the field and let them decide it themselves. But I got an interesting thing to talk about here with the +1 system. Let's think about the +1 system here. Top 4 teams in the country would have been LSU, Alabama, Oklahoma State, and then who was the other team? Stanford.
I would say Stanford.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's my problem with that, though. Only one of those 4 teams played 13 games. Okay, LSU had to play the SEC championship game.
Yeah.
Stanford didn't play in the Pac-12 championship game. The Big 12 doesn't have a championship game right now. So if you were to go to this +1 system, I would say that it needs to be fair across the board. So then you get into the whole discussion once again. Do you have to win your conference? And if you win your conference, should there be a conference championship game? In order to make it fair for every team, these are things you've got to consider. What's your opinion on that?
When you look at certain playoff systems, you can, closest related, you would say, oh, look at the NFL. You have 2 wild cards and 4 division champions.
Right.
And you could honestly say, okay, get a team that whoever wins your conference is into this playoff, and you could have a certain wild card, 1 or 2 teams from each conference in this playoff, and have this, I don't know, I guess 30 tournament team. Just
right.
Just a certain number of teams in there. And you go, okay, this is it. This is our system. These are the teams that are in it, and we'll let them play out from here. And you could, when you get out in the details and all that, you could still include bowl games and this and that.
And I think that right now that's the biggest thing is there's so much money invested in these bowl games. There's so much tradition in these bowl games. You can't just do away with these bowl games. No. I think that's something that fans need to understand is that at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's all about the money. And right now there's so much money that's tied up into this BCS system. BCS is thinking about pulling out. I had heard a report from a couple months ago that they're considering dropping their affiliation with the Rose Bowl, Fiesta, Sugar, and Orange Bowl and only having the BCS title.
Yeah.
And one of the big reasons around that is they want to go over to some different stadiums. You talk about Jerry World over in Dallas. Yeah. Great venue for a national championship game. The Super Bowl this year is in Indianapolis at that new stadium. Beautiful stadium up there. Get it up north a little bit. Yeah. I see where that's coming in. But once again, when you talk playoff, you talk +1.